How's it going, my baking buddies? Hope you're having a fine day so far. Welcome back to another video. We all know that bread and butter are made for each other, so today I'll show you how to make both of them. So let's get in the kitchen and get started. One of the tastiest things ever, in my opinion, is freshly baked bread with a thick layer of butter and a sprinkling of sea salt. I've made hundreds of bread recipes on this channel, and recently I even made a few different cheeses, but I had never made butter in my life. As it turns out, butter is extremely simple to make. All we need is some double cream, also known as heavy cream, and some optional salt. 1 or 2 ingredients. That's what makes butter. Of course there is the process, but that is also very simple. And if you have the equipment, it is also very easy. But let's start with the ingredients. Here in the UK, we have double cream. It is extra fatty cream that is used for cooking or whipping and such. This one is 50% fat. The fattier the cream, the more butter we'll get out of it. And I believe in America, this will be called heavy cream. The sea salt is optional. You want to make unsalted butter, leave it out. When it comes to the equipment, all we need is a jar with a tight fitting lid. And now in this video, I'll show you 2 methods of making butter. The manual method, which I'm showing you now, and the mechanical method, using a mixer, which I'll show you later. To make the butter manually, pour the cream in a jar, add the salt, close the lid and shake the hell out of it. First, after a couple minutes, it'll turn into whipped cream. The difficult part is getting it from this stage to the stage where it starts splitting up. This process takes a lot of energy. And if you're going to do it, I would recommend reducing the amount of cream. Try it with half the amount first. That should make it easier. I did not have a good time, I can tell you that. And this will be the first and most likely last time I'm doing this manually. Saying that, I did get butter in the end. This is what it should look like when the fat and buttermilk separate. I'm weighing the buttermilk because I'm going to use it as a liquid in the bread dough recipe later. We are not wasting anything here. Okay, once you've drained off the buttermilk, get a bowl of cold water and drop the butter in it. We want to wash off as much of the buttermilk as possible. If you store the butter in the fridge for a long time and has loads of buttermilk in it, it may go a little bit funky. I'm not going to test the longevity of this. I'm using this butter for some brioche recipes. Change the water at least once and wash the butter until the water runs clear. Then you can pat the butter dry with some kitchen paper. You may ask yourself, why make butter at home? For one, you know what's in it because you made it. But secondly, you get a lot more for your money. I paid about 20% less for the cream as I would have paid for the block of butter, and I got 20% more butter out of it, so it is considerably cheaper. But if you are making it with the manual method, it is pretty difficult, and for some people it might not even be possible. Well, let's wrap this little beauty up, put it in the fridge, and let's make one more block of butter. This time using a mixer to help us out. You can just as well use one of those electric hand whisks, but regardless of which piece of equipment you use, the process will be the same. Pour the cream in a bowl, add the salt if you want to, and then use the whisk attachment to whip the cream on high speed until the butter separates from the buttermilk. It took me around 3 to 4 minutes in my Kenwood mixer. First, the cream will turn into whipped cream, then will turn into something resembling scrambled eggs, and then as you keep whisking, the butter will all collect inside the whisk, which on one hand is good because it's all in one place, but on the other hand it is a bit of a pain to remove it. Once again, I'm collecting the buttermilk because I'm going to use it in the bread recipe, but the following steps after whisking out the butter are the same as in the previous method. Collect the butter into a bowl, then get a bowl of cold water, wash it off, change the water once or twice until it runs clear, then pat it dry, shape it into a block if you want to, wrap it up in some baking paper, leave it in the fridge, and I hope that by now you are eager to give this a try yourself. You could even add other ingredients to your butter to flavor it. Some spices or herbs would work really well. I'll leave those decisions up to you. Now if you're only looking for a butter recipe, then this video is over. But if you want a nice bread recipe to go along with your butter, then keep watching. As you can see, I've got some whole grains here. Wheat, rye, bulgur wheat, we have some yeast, some salt, some caraway seeds, some black treacle, the buttermilk, and some sunflower seeds. You do not need to use freshly milled flour for this recipe. Simply replace the wheat grain with whole wheat flour, the rye grain with whole grain rye flour, and the bulgur wheat with some plain white flour. And if you don't have enough buttermilk, just make up the difference with water. Okay, let's start making this bread. It all begins with milling. I set my mill to the recommended wheat milling setting, which is number 1, and I switched it on before pouring the grains in the hopper. The mill that I'm using is a Mock Mill Lino 200. It is quick and effective. I chilled my grains in the fridge to control milling temperature. I'm gonna sift out some of the bran to use as a coating for the loaf later on. Watch the other videos in the home milling playlist for more information if you're interested. Now, even though the grain is chilled, the flour comes out warm. That is why I cooled down the buttermilk a little bit before using it. This recipe is pretty straightforward. The only special method I'm going to use here is cold fermentation, but you don't need to. Simply leave the dough to bulk ferment at room temperature until it doubles before final shaping, and then proofing and baking. You can use the buttermilk in any recipe that you like. The way I came up with this recipe is that I opened my baking cupboard and took a bunch of random things and threw them together. Freshly milled wheat flour has very weak gluten. Adding the rye and the bulgur wheat will make it even weaker, and that is why I will bake this loaf in a loaf tin. It will help it keep its shape, because this feels more like a light rye bread than a wheat bread. Still, the result will be pretty good. As per usual, I was aiming for around 25 degrees Celsius or 77 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's what I got. The dough goes straight into the fridge for 30 minutes of chilling, and after that, I'm giving it one fold. The only reason why I'm folding this dough is to cool it down evenly. As the outside cools, the inside is still warm. By folding, I'm distributing that temperature evenly. After the fold, the dough goes into the fridge for around 18 to 24 hours of cold bulk fermentation. And now it's the next day and it has fermented beautifully. I'm gonna prep my baking tin by brushing with some olive oil. This will toast the crust of the bread, give it a bit of extra flavor, and it will prevent it from sticking to the tin, which it probably wouldn't do anyway. When it comes to final shaping, there is not much to it. The dough is not sticky, so there's no need for flour. Just flatten it out and roll it up into a log, making it as straight and even as possible. To coat the loaf with the bran, brush it with some water, then sprinkle the bran on a tray or directly on the table, and then roll the loaf gently in the bran to coat the whole surface. Then place it in the baking tin with the seam side down. Now it's ready for the final proof. Don't expect it to rise a lot. It should grow by about 50%. And that took me around 2.5 to 3 hours. During the final hour of fermentation, preheat the oven to 180 degrees Celsius, 355 Fahrenheit, fan on. And that'll be 200 Celsius or 390 Fahrenheit, fan off. I mentioned earlier that this dough felt like a light rye bread dough, so I'm scoring it using a rye bread scoring method, which is by poking a bunch of holes in it with a chopstick. I covered it with a lid and baked it for 40 minutes initially. If you don't have a lid, just use some tin foil. The lid is there to protect the crust from browning too much too soon. Spraying the loaf with water is optional. I wanted to keep it nice and moist to help it rise. After the initial bake, remove it from the tin and place it back into the oven for another 10 to 15 minutes of baking. This is a relatively dense loaf, so it takes a bit longer. And if you are unsure of the doneness of your bread, check the temperature. If it reads about 94 degrees Celsius or 200 degrees Fahrenheit in the middle, it's ready. And there you go. That's how you make homemade butter and then use the buttermilk to make some homemade bread. And now you can combine the two and enjoy which is perhaps one of the tastiest things ever created, bread and butter. I really enjoyed this project, just as much as I enjoyed my cheese projects. I like to create that connection between the ingredients. We're making one thing and using the leftovers to make the other thing. And then in the end, we combine the results and eat them together. Learning some new tricks along the way and getting some tasty results. Look out for some brioche recipes coming soon. I need to use up all that butter somehow. So what do you think of these recipes? Have you ever made butter before? Let me know down in the comments. You want to see more videos like this one? Click over here. Subscribe to the channel, click right here. That's all I have for you today. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.